Yes, we are back. This is the Secret Sun Radio Mystery Hour, and I am back with Raj Sisodia, writer, video artist, and blogger of A Midnight Suns. We are here to talk about the two X-Files episodes. This, written and directed by Glenn Morgan, and Plus One, written by Chris Carter and directed by new X-Files director Kevin Hooks. Okay, yes, we are back, and let's talk about these very exciting episodes of the 11th season of the X-Files, probably the final season. But boy, I'll tell you, after a very weak start, we have two firecrackers to talk about here, two really solid, old-school X-Files.
Definitely.
Yeah, so Raj, let's start with this. We have basically a standalone mythology hybrid here to look at, and it's working into this new mythology that Carter sort of sketched out on a napkin in the first episode, My Struggle 3, and Glenn Morgan really did yeoman's work into trying to delineate, to expand, to explain. And what we also had here for old school fans of the X-Files is basically we had Glenn Morgan writing a sequel to one of my favorite all-time episodes, Kill Switch. So,
Definitely.
yeah. So tell me, Raj, what are your thoughts on this episode overall?
Well, Chris, to be honest, it's like I really, really loved this episode, and it's funny because I've rewatched it a couple of times, right, in the past week or so, and yeah, it's just really grown on me. The sci-fi thriller elements work, the kind of sort of character-based humor stuff really works. And yeah, it just seems to tap into the kind of zeitgeist of where we are now. So insofar as Carter is kind of like building a new 2018 era mythology, yeah, I thought it really worked. And we can kind of go into some of the details of that kind of new mythology as and when. Yeah, but overall, I was massively impressed. And I've only grown more so since I've had the chance to kind of rewatch and study a little closer.
Well, there's an interesting phenomenon going on with the revival is that we basically have two showrunners, and you could almost argue we have two shows within one. We have Chris Carter and Glenn Morgan. And of course, Glenn Morgan was one of the original writers and producers of the X-Files, co-wrote the first standalone, the first monster of the week, as it were, wrote so many key, pivotal, fan favorite episodes, and certainly some of my favorites, such as One Breath, which is one of my favorite all-time episodes. And Glenn Morgan, of course, is also a big pop culture hound. We had that teaser with the Ramones, California Sun. We had all sorts of call-outs to earlier X-Files episodes, as if the Glenn Morgan, the nostalgist, is sort of treating this episode as a sort of a pop culture nostalgia parade, the way his earlier episodes on the first series were. So let's talk about this mythology, though. It almost seems to me that like I said, we have two separate shows sort of working in tandem here. That Carter and Morgan are sort of taking different tacks of this. And I know you wanted to talk about the ideas of simulation theory, alternate realities, alternate artificial intelligence. What are you seeing here? I mean, what is shaping up in this new mythology, and how do you think it connects to what we are seeing in the world around us?
Yeah, I think those are all great questions. Yeah, I think that as anyone who's paid attention to, I guess the alternative research community over the last few years, and will know that simulation theory has become all the vogue. You've got Elon Musk, you've got articles in mainstream press covering this, from various angles, so it's not just like the far extreme fringes of the alternative scene. It's like,
yeah, you don't get any more mainstream than Elon Musk,
Exactly, right? So you've got all this stuff. You've got like AI is really picking up. simulation theory is all the vogue. It's kind of in the air. You've got things like fringe things like the Mandela effect. I guess what I'm saying is that in a kind of a political climate that we have now, where it's like a lot of people have this feeling that we've kind of veered into some alternate timeline, and I'm speaking figuratively here, right? Not literally, but just the sense that society, politics, everything in some sense has kind of gone off the rails, and this is kind of feeling of like shock, bemusement, uncertainty. So all the faith in the old truths, as it were, that faith is kind of evaporated. So we find ourselves in this kind of strange post-modern world where it seems like, well, hell, maybe anything is possible. How much do we really know about quantum physics? How much do we really know about biology or chemistry or the cosmos or any of that stuff? So, yeah, I think that Carter was really trying to put his finger on the pulse there. And as he's always done with the X-Files, it's like taking current concerns and things that are kind of out there in the air, in the vibe, and feeding it back into his kind of fictional, paranoid, sci-fi thriller narrative. And I think he does that very, very well. Glenn Morgan's script, and in this it just struck me as very effective. I guess that this episode was very effective at pushing a lot of different buttons.
Yeah, I loved it, and I know there was some quibbling about the pacing and the editing and some of the action scenes. And you know what? It's television. I don't expect feature film perfection from these things. You got to just sort of take. I mean, if you go back and look at earlier seasons of the X-Files and hold it up to that standard of perfection that people expect now, I think it would definitely fall short.
But those imperfections, they become less distracting on rewatches. Like speaking as like a hardcore fan, right? Like when I rewatched the episode for maybe the third time, I was just picking up and I was studying all of the kind of the meat of the story, and it felt a lot stronger and a lot clearer, I guess, because I'd had time to reflect and stand back a little before I re-engaged. So yeah.
So let's talk about this for a second, because after we go into +1, I want to explore this idea of simulation theory and alternate realities, all these kind of things, because they're very much, as people read the blog know, they're very much on my mind as of late. And also, I'm just really picking up on a through line here that I want to explore with you, later on in the discussion. But there's an interesting mechanism at work here, because we had this pattern established from the very first season that Chris Carter would kick in with the mythology, and that Glenn Morgan and James Wong as well, I mean, they were writing partners at the time, would they picked up the pace with the Squeeze, which is the first monster of the week, and they gave us things like Ice and Home, these great the Hand of Verletz is another great Morgan and Wong standalone that's almost a feature film unto itself. But
very iconic standalones, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we're seeing here is a very interesting mechanism, and I wanted to sort of explore this a bit, because what we're having here is that Glenn Morgan's up. He's the next batter up after. Well, let's in my opinion, I think Carter sort of struck out with My Struggle 3, and one of the reasons I'm thinking that happened, and it's something that another thing that we can discuss, is that I just don't think he really cares about the mythology anymore. I just the difference in writing, the dialogue, and the structure and the pacing between My Struggle 3 and +1, it's almost like you're looking at two entirely separate writers. Yes. You have Carter sort of weighing in with the techno babble, and this it reminds me of listening to academics or to doctors speak, and they speak differently than you or I speak. Their cadence is different. The way they inject all these 20-syllable words into their vocabulary is different. I mean, Carter is really referencing that. I mean, he's referencing the way Mulder and Scully would actually speak in real life. They wouldn't speak like you or I, but at the same point in time, the dialogue in +1 sounds naturalistic. It doesn't sound like, oh God, it's scraping my ears. Nobody actually talks like that. But Glenn Morgan is a great dialogue man. He's a great naturalistic dialogue man. His his words really flow. If I had a criticism of Morgan, it would be that I think he's got issues with conceptually. I mean, he seems to always reimagine things and redo things. He's not necessarily a creative force, but he's a great character writer, and he's a great dialogue writer. So what we had after this very difficult and challenging season premiere is that we had it was almost like going on vacation, and you just sit back and let Glenn Morgan drive the car. He does so beautifully and naturally. But let's talk about the way he handles things like AI. I had called out before the season even started, when I saw those teasers on YouTube and whatnot. I said Langley's coming back as an AI, and lo and behold, that's what we saw. As far as the politics are concerned, I'm wondering if the politics are not in. There's an argument that our politics are somehow warping our reality and creating this whole simulation effect. But I'm wondering if it's the exact opposite. I'm wondering if the politics are just the byproduct of this strange new reality matrix that we are living in, and it's something that this this second episode really tries to tackle. Now, in your estimation, do you feel that was done cogently? Do you feel like maybe they dodged some of the thornier aspects of this, or do you think that it was well integrated into what we are familiar with as X-Files formula?
The way that they took all that stuff and worked it into the episode, I think they kind of streamlined it a little bit. I mean, because we're talking about this sort of really unwieldy, bizarre kind of new reality that we find ourselves in, and we're still trying to model and discuss we're still trying to discuss ways to model this new kind of paradigm that we find ourselves in, like politically, where we are in terms of science, where we are in terms of culture. And so I think I think a lot of things were hinted at in that second episode, in what I would consider to be a fairly elegant way. I mean, there's so much subtext, for example, in Langley's piece to camera, where he's talking to Mulder about what it's like being in this simulation. And there's so many lines that you could interpret a million different ways as sort of being commentary on certain things without slamming you over the head with it. So I guess
deft handling of the issues is, I think, what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, he's talking about being in this simulated world and how all these famous, iconic people are there, but how everything is inverted. They don't even know who they are. And, it's a really eerie, frightening, and still kind of funny scene with Langley, where he's discussing this stuff that you could say, okay, well, maybe Carter's alluding to this, or maybe he's alluding to that. And I think that's the dexterity, I guess, that I've seen in X-Files so many times, where they can distill the essences, I suppose, of some of these ideas and themes, but kind of make it service the story. I guess what I'm trying to say is in less skillful hands, a writer might be like, oh, great, this is a great opportunity to discuss this and this and this and this, until the point where it kind of becomes bigger than Langley's story, or it becomes bigger than the story that the episode is trying to tell. And I think that was resisted in that episode. So yeah, I think it was very elegantly done and kind of left open a lot of room for interpretation. And I think that was serviced by things like the long-haired assassin,
who's almost like a Langley, doppelganger. Yeah.
Exactly. And he's creepy as hell, and they kind of give him that signature thing where he does that sort of menacing circular motion with his finger, kind of like, I got you in my sights, buddy. But that's
a classic Glenn Morganism.
Yeah, but that works, right? In the sense of simulation, cycles, reversals, clockwise, anti-clockwise, and he does that final signature move, doesn't he, in the last scene?
Very disturbing. Yeah.
yeah, and I loved that because it's, the writer's not saying like, this is what is or this is what isn't. it's a kind of, it's an atmosphere, it's an ambience, it's a kind of like, okay, well, how deep does this go? Like, what does this imply? What does this mean? So I was just really pleased with it because it was effective, it was eerie, it kind of was of a piece of the kind of sci-fi AI simulation stuff that was the kind of bones of the story, and it could have so easily become an opportunity to just have lots of like alternative commentary that kind of was bigger than the story itself. They resisted that, and I thought that was an elegant way to handle it.
Let's talk about the Barbara Hershey character and this performance that she gives in this boardroom that is so clearly meant to call out to Network, the great scene with Ned Beatty, which to me is one of the pivotal scenes of cinema history, in that it spells out exactly the world that is been created in the wake of the Cold War and World War II, and the world that we are living in now, the world where corporations and money basically have replaced governments, have replaced civil society, that everything is answerable and subjective to corporate power. Now, the interesting thing is that her character's name is Erica Price, and that to me seems to be a very clear parallel to Eric Prince of Blackwater fame.
I thought the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing here is sort of a commentary on the fact that the military-industrial complex has done something quite ingenious underneath our feet, in that they have privatized their power and have, as such, made their power unaccountable. Absolutely uncountable. I mean, one of the things that people may not realize is that, so we have all these wars going on in various countries, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan, and the real dirty work is done by companies like DynCorp. These basically private armies that have become the sort of the dominant player in the neocolonialism that we're seeing today. So they sort of draw attention to this with this whole idea that this is an American company, that but it's actually headquartered in Moscow, and sort of opening the door to this this new Cold War that we're seeing today is actually just a charade, and that beneath the surface the power structure is contiguous, that it is working hand in hand. So
which was also like implied in seasons like 2, 3, and 4 of the X-Files, right? Like the players on the global stage, the whatever we're seeing in the overt political sphere is actually, the same kind of power plays are going on. Like you said, that those power structures are continuous.
I don't know. The Syndicate really drifted away from its original conception into the fifth season. They sort of became almost like Bond villains. The thing that I really appreciate about the Syndicate, and especially before we actually saw their faces. I mean, once we saw their faces, you go, oh, this is just a bunch of guys in a smoking room on 46th Street in Manhattan. I mean, it takes away that unknowability, that mystique that adds to the threat. For instance, in the beginning, everything is sort of seen as a global conspiracy, but I think that Carter and Spotnitz tried very hard to indicate that this conspiracy works within the government, but is run through a network of shell companies. Say the mining installation where the files were kept in West Virginia in Paperclip, which to me is one of the greatest episodes of television ever made. And in that network, it tells you exactly what is coming, what the world is moving towards. And we're starting to hear these things about, things going on with DNA tests and cops trying to legally collect DNA samples. All that was prefigured in Paperclip and those early seasons of the X-Files. Now, in this case, we're seeing Morgan explore this new mythology, this new paradigm through this Erica Price character. Now, let's talk. I know you had mentioned that you thought the actress was particularly striking in My Struggle 3. I mean, this whole conversation where it sort of spins off in this entirely new direction, where we have the singularity and consciousness uploading and space exploration. I mean, just sort of this mad jumble of futuristic concepts. How do you think this played in that scene, which I think is meant to sort of be the defining central, revelatory scene of that episode of this?
I think, well, like with any of those types of scenes, it was heavily expositional, right? But I think for me personally, what made it work was Barbara Hershey's performance and kind of the way Mulder's sort of semi-comic reactions to the kind of terrifying things that she's saying. And so, like you mentioned about Network with Ned Beatty, right? Like, old Ned, he doesn't play that scene as a bad guy. That iconic scene, which I've seen many times. He doesn't play it as this kind of menacing arch villain. He's like, for him, it's just the way things are. And I think Barbara Hershey plays it with that same kind of quality, except I think the way she plays Erica Price, especially in that second episode, is with a kind of a quality I would sort of describe as like a savage delight, as if, for example, she's fully aware how terrifying and insane all of these things are. And in some way, she's kind of getting off on it in a very sort of weird cerebral way, or that's the kind of feeling that I kind of got from her,
which is very Smoking Man, don't you think?
Yeah, totally, it is. And it's like as if this woman, whatever her background is, knows that she has a fearsome intellect, she has a lot of power at her disposal, and basically no one can mess with her, right? Like she's fully aware of of what she has at her disposal. And that quality of savage delight, almost as if she's like profiling Mulder as she's saying these things, It's like she's like gaming him, and Mulder kind of realizes he's being gamed. He's just not sure on what level he's being gamed. So he's kind of giving these slightly glib responses.
Very Mulderistic. Very Mulderistic, yeah.
Well, so, yeah. I really dug it. Like, she just seemed formidable. Like I think I mentioned in our earlier talk, she just has this. Even if they give her a bunch of exposition to say, she just delivers it in this very creepy, formidable. She just seems formidable. Like I would not want to mess with that woman. No way. Like I wouldn't want her as an enemy.
Yeah, to me that was a callback to another fifth season favorite of mine, which is Redux 2. And just that fantastic scene on the street between Smoking Man and Mulder. And, Mulder saying, I don't believe you anymore. I talked to one of your men. He told me, the way things really are. And Smoking Man is just kind of Carl. Carl is just kind of laughing. I mean, he's just kind of like, you idiot. You think that guy knows anything? You think this Critchkow character knows what's going on? He knows what we tell him. Come on. It's like, well, what are you going to tell me? Well, come to work for me. I mean, that whole scene, it's so indelible and it's so like tattooed onto my brain. And, one of the great things also about it, and one thing that I mentioned when I talked to Chris Carter is I said, you get a sense that this is a father and son, that, Bill Davis and Mulder in that scene really do look like father and son. But that's sort of a little bit of a side road here, because what I really want to get to is that what we're seeing here in this scene with Barbara Hershey is the classic Dr. Faust, Mephistopheles,
Absolutely.
bargaining, this sort of archetype. It's an archetype of Western drama, of this deal with the devil, and particularly a deal with the devil that has to do with technology, has to do with hidden knowledge.
Exactly. A deal with a digital devil in a way, like in the sense that like that's what I mean about she's gaming him. It's like we live in an age of information. We live in an age of data, and everyone thinks that they have the correct a priori assumptions to interpret that data. But moving in from 2016 into 2017, I think a lot of people have kind of recoiled at the shock of like, oh, you know what? My a priori assumptions about what is conspiracy, what is truth, what is falsehood, were kind of way, way wrong. And I think that I get a sense of that quality when Barbara Hershey's character is talking to Mulder in that scene. It's that like, she's saying like, on what level do you think, on what level are you interpreting information, and on what level can I game you in terms of that information or lack of information? I just feel like as if in that scene, she's playing Mulder on several different levels, and Mulder's only aware of a few of them. And I just think that's really effective that she managed to sort of convey that sort of feeling, even if it wasn't explicit in the dialogue necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it feels to me like almost like a gender reversed version of that great scene in The Blessing Way between the well manicured man and Scully, again, which is another one of these just like burned into your consciousness scenes where the well manicured man, very calmly and without any malice or intent, just basically spells out to Scully how they plan to kill her. And it's so coldly dictated that it's all the more menacing because we get the sense that Scully means absolutely nothing to the well-manicured man. I mean, he's talking to her the way that you would talk maybe to your neighbor's pet, and that he has no investment in her. He just feels that killing her would be momentarily inconvenient to him and his plans. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. It's like, I feel like my colleagues are being, impetuous and rash and all these kind of things. It's just like, I don't give a shit about you. You can die if you want, but I would rather you didn't because it upsets my agenda. And also this, another great scene from Paperclip. And I really feel like Glenn Morgan really invested himself in these seasons, that he really dug into these old episodes, particularly the Vancouver episodes, and said, what is this about? What can I use as lines of continuity to make this all make sense? And also,
and even, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, even in terms of like the way the pieces in the actual story fit together, I think you're right. He's clearly going back and he's looking not just for lines of continuity, but just in terms of how to create a smoother feeling episode arc. But like with Barbara Hershey, just going back to her for a second, it's like that kind of savage delight that I mentioned. It's like I don't feel like as if it's even personal towards Mulder. It's like it's almost as if like this character is thinking, so I heard on the like dark intelligence grapevine that you're some hot shit like master investigator, alien god dude, right? I want to see kind of just how smart you are, mate. Like that's the kind of feeling I got. Like it's
like a cat toying with a mouse almost.
Yeah, but in a kind of exactly, in an impersonal way. Like and that was what was so kind of like Faustian and chilling about it, like you said.
Let's talk about the there's been some controversy, not necessarily controversy, but criticism directed at this episode about sort of these tonal shifts that we go from this I think a very exciting and well staged scene with the shootout and the teaser, and then the confrontation with the mercenaries, the Blackwater dudes. I thought that that was all very exciting and very well staged. But a lot of people seem to think that some of the quippy banter and some of the humor was a bit misplaced, that it didn't really suit the tone of the overall story. And my reaction to this would be like, what X-Files episodes have you actually watched? I mean, that is the X-Files formula. I mean, that's the X-Files magic. I mean, even like really, really dark episodes like Tempest Fugit Max, you had that leavening, that lightning, that the little spoonful of sugar, because without that, it just becomes so heavy and ponderous. And I really appreciated that. This the drama and the more humorous elements that fit into this and really are part of the X-Files magic. And of course, we also had maybe a bit inexplicably, but Mulder and Scully looking very domestic in their situation at the beginning and the end of this episode. And I'm wondering if these episodes maybe have been reordered, that maybe we're not seeing the episodes in order, or this is an indication that there's something else at work here. But let's talk about this this classic X-Files blend of drama and lighter elements. I mean, how did that play out for you? And do you think that maybe is unfashionable these days, or seen as inappropriate?
I think so, yeah. I think so. And I think because I don't think the episode got it quite perfect. I mean, but I think they got it pretty damn close. And that's just because I love the show so much that I'm going to see little nitpicky criticisms where other people are just going to see story or script or whatever. So, but for me, I think if you go back and you look at Mulder as a character and Scully as a character, right? These are kind of superhero investigators, right? And so from the beginning, Mulder's conceit, the conceit of his character is that this guy's fucking crazy. Like he's like unstoppably motivated, right? And he's also inappropriate at times, going all the way back to season 1. He's extremely playful. He's like a weird mix of like genius and kind of like adolescent. You know what I mean? He plays around with Scully. He loves wordplay. He loves kind of being slightly inappropriate. At certain times, he's not always as tactful as he should be. Just because I think, Duchovny plays this guy, he's like, this guy's a genius, right? But he's also, he's also capable of being really unstable and dangerous if he's like pushed too far. And that's the kind of like volatile quality of his character that, makes him so intense and such a good investigator, but also kind of tragic at times. So all those beats and the fact that Scully, she's got to rein him in, but she enjoys this sort of slightly absurd take that Mulder has on life. Their chemistry is palpable, and I think that chemistry, a part of that chemistry, is the fact that these two people are both edgy and sort of slightly strange in different ways, right? I mean, Scully's this doctor, FBI agent, Catholic. She has all these kind of like contrasts and paradoxes in her character, the same way as Mulder. So from that sense, like when humor can kind of like surface through character in those kinds of ways, then I love it. So yeah, some people might say, oh, it was a little bit heavy-handed. Like, would you really quip after someone just tried to blow your head off? You could argue yes, you could argue no, but it's not like out of the realm of Mulder and Scully's characters as they've been defined thus far, I guess is what I'm saying.
All these things that you raised, insofar as the chemistry, insofar as Mulder's drive and his intensity, and also the humor that is sort of sprinkled throughout this, that really harkens back to the very earliest episodes of the series. And in one instance, an episode that I remember after I saw this episode thinking, oh my God, what the hell did I just see? That was like the most extreme and radical thing I've ever seen on television in my life. It's like, is somebody going to come and arrest me for watching that? And that's Deep Throat, basically the second pilot. But so you have this incredibly, the thing starts off with these military stormtroopers running through people's backyards and then, breaking down the door. And then you find this guy who's like basically extraordinarily traumatized, and he's all blistered and he's shaking and he's naked and it's just horrible. And in hindsight, 25 years on, you think, well, whatever. I mean, that's just television. No, but it wasn't television back then. You were like, what the hell am I watching? But you also had the the comic relief in that. You had the Seth Green character and his girlfriend, and it really it was very well placed, because without that episode would have been so traumatizing and disturbing that I think people just would have just shut down.
I adore that episode. It's every time I watch it, it's still so thrilling. But you know what I think? I think the comedy relief in that episode, the Seth Green character, right? I think it only strengthens the richness and the kind, I don't know, the satisfying quality of like when movies, I don't know, Spielberg or someone, I don't know, like when they can get that balance of humor and drama or thriller right, it's like the two serve each other. You know what I mean? And I think that's the case in Deep Throat, definitely.
Yeah, so the thing that I really liked about this is that it really ties back to that early vibe where you are seeing the mixture of light and shadow, that it's not like Slayer or something where it's just it's all heavy beats and it's all it becomes desensitizing after a while, and that's sort of a problem that I have with a lot of newer shows, and I think it's a problem that a lot of people had with Millennium as well. And Vince Gilligan said something really interesting. He said, Millennium taught me the value of humor. In that, he said, Millennium was a great show, great writers, great actors, great storylines, but it failed because it was so dark. It was so unremitting. It was like an endurance test for a lot of people. For instance, my wife, after, I believe it was 52666, the bomber episode, she just said, I can't watch the show anymore. This is too upsetting.
Yeah,
It's too stressful. And I think that the humor that we saw in this, and is really not only an X-Files trademark, but I think also a trademark of Glenn Morgan. His writing really helps sell the drama, because you're not just it's not just a one note kind of thing. You have that balance of tones.
I think it goes deeper than that, though, Chris. I think that that humor, right? In pop culture, we love pop culture, and pop culture, in a true fan, kind of kindles a sense of fun and play. Hence cosplay, and hence all the way that people try to sort of draw those fantasy worlds closer to them. And I think you can never underestimate the quality of play in terms of making someone feel closer to you, or fall in love with you, or appreciate your point of view. It's like, because playfulness and humor are ways that we sort of transcend the ordinary. And so like I think you can't underestimate that. It's such a powerful thing. I mean, like, you take a really brilliant sci-fi thriller, for example, that's brilliantly edited, well choreographed and everything, like you said, right? Like Millennium. But you just drop a few beats of genuine playfulness or humor that feel like they're a natural outgrowth of whatever's happening, as in real life, and I guarantee you that episode is going to be 10 times more captivating just because of those things. And so when you can suffuse a story with things like that, it's an intoxicating thing. And I think sometimes storytellers lose sight of that because they kind of get wrapped up in the gravity, their own sort of gravitas of whatever it is they're trying to convey,
So let's move this forward then. Let's talk about +1, because this was a really, really interesting episode, and so many callbacks to earlier episodes, to early ideas. I mean, we sort of get a sense of this is almost like a shopping list of Chris Carter fixations and obsessions. And the interesting thing, again, is this: I couldn't believe how this is just night and day with the writing. Particularly the dialogue writing between this and My Struggle 3, which it just was like jarring to me. It's like, nobody talks like this. Nobody talks like this. Stop it. I mean, people don't even write like this anymore. It's what I call Chris Carter's Stan Lee mode.
Yeah, no, for me, it's almost like, as a fan of like Victorian literature, right? Like, I love that sort of overly grand, slightly ornate register of discourse, if it's or of poetry, if it's done well. But like, when you got FBI agents trying to like unveil a grand conspiracy, it's like, yeah, don't lapse into kind of some weird Victoriana 1960s comic book hybrid way of talking, because like, you got shapeshifters to fight, dude. Like, like there's no time for any of that stuff. Like, so yeah, I agree with you. It's the dialogue in +1 had a very gentle and a kind of like dance-like quality. Yeah, like, even when, for example, when Mulder's talking to Chucky, right, their interactions is like a dance. It's like Chucky's the dominant partner, and Mulder's kind of trying to keep up the pace with Chucky. So they have this sort of musical back and forth in the way they kind of deliver their lines towards each other. And he's like, Karen Conoval is like jabbing his finger in Mulder's face and kind of saying these hilarious things, not really giving a shit about like what Mulder's going to think of him, and I loved it. It was so over the top, but I loved it.
Yeah, to me, this is Chris Carter's dialogue writing, at his, I think, in his comfortable mode. See, I have a theory developing, and that is, I think that Chris Carter is like really sick to death of writing the mythology, and he's basically writing it, almost at gunpoint. And one of the things that sort of bolsters this suspicion of mine is reading how last minute these scripts have been. Tweets from Ann Simon, who's the scientific advisor on the show. It's like, oh yeah, Chris just wrote the episode. Well, it's like, I thought the episode was supposed to be shooting, and he just finished the episode. I mean, the writing is very first draft to me, and a lot of writers will tend to lapse into this stilted, sort of flowery writing, on their first drafts. It's something that I've noticed with a lot of people, and something that I've noticed in myself as well. It's like,
yeah, me too. But I think there's a time and a place for it, right? And a context for a slightly grander register of talking. But I think in a show like the X-Files, I think naturalistic is always the way to go. Because suspension of disbelief and whatnot. It's like the conceit of the show is not set up as, some mystical sage talking in this kind of flowery language. So keep us grounded so that we can sort of look to the sky and wonder.
Again, I don't think it's deliberate. I just think it's a function of like, oh Christ, I've got to write this stuff again. Because I think that he was really finished with the mythology for good at the end of the 8th season, and even as early as the 3rd season, he's kind of handing the reins off to Frank Spotnitz. So I just don't think that he's as engaged with the mythology as fans seem to think he is. And I think his natural element of these kind of very weird and very idiosyncratic and surrealist narratives that really date back with him to Sisodia. And the rap on Sisodia, since it came the week after War of the Copperphages, is that it was a Darren Morgan ripoff, and it's actually much different than Darren Morgan. It's much more anarchic. It's much there's a sense of adventure and of try anything. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you would imagine a guy who took a lot of LSD and surfed a lot, for his formative years would write. I don't know what that has to do with Chris Carter, but I'm just saying, let's just put that out there. Sometimes it can really crash and burn, and like in the case of Babylon from last season, where I think that I saw what he was going for, but
me too.
Yeah,
me too.
He was his reach exceeded his grasp, and but that to me is like, that's when Carter sort of steps out to do his own thing, I think that's what he goes for. He goes for this very strange, quirky, really one of a kind of story.
When Carter goes for that that bug out, batshit insanity type stuff that he clearly loves, it's almost like I can feel Duchovny getting off on it. Like I can feel like he just, I might be completely off here, but whenever those episodes happen, I feel like I can feel Duchovny's relish in sort of like, oh, this is going to be like, whether it's a bad story or not, like this is going to be fun to play because it's just so out there.
Yeah, it's something that he doesn't get a chance to play anywhere else. I always got that sense with Gillian Anderson but what she decided to play here is that she's playing the straight man. She's playing it totally straight. She's not trying to be humorous. She's not trying to treat this as anything else but just a standard issue X-Files standalone monster of the week.
I think that works in a way, and I think the reason why it works is because the two central characters, right, Chucky and Judy, they're so off the wall, over the top, that I think a story like this would only really feel satisfying if it's grounded in the kind of more classic Mulder and Scully go to some strange place, find a bunch of weird people, stay in hotels, talk a bit, and eventually figure out sort of what is going on. It's very classic Monster of the Week X-Files, and I think that was one of its strengths. I mean, I think if Scully had kind of played it slightly broader or less serious, I think it might have lost some of that grounded quality that made Karen Conneval's performance pop so much, if that makes sense.
Oh, her performance is just astonishing. It is absolutely astonishing.
She's sort of like, because it's like Mulder says in the beginning, right? Let's get back to our bread and butter. Like, it's a signal to the fans of like, this is going to be a classic Monster of the Week. Mulder and Scully out investigating some crazy weirdness in some remote location. And that's what we got. So I kind of liked the idea of like Scully sort of trying to ease her way back into like old Scully, like as if in some weird way she feels compelled to spout some skeptical stuff that even she doesn't believe. And I think Gillian plays it that way. The kind of hesitancy as she's talking and the sort of smile on her face, and Mulder's reactions where he's like, but he's sort of enjoying their banter. So yeah, I really dug that. I dug just Gillian's performance when she's trying to convince herself that like ghosts don't exist, even though she's seen ghosts clearly, and the fact that like she's well aware that like the devil might potentially visit her in the night one time, even though she's not really supposed to believe in the devil, even though she met the devil more than once. But yeah, so I dug all that. That was cool.
Well, maybe I should bring this up now. I mean, we could sort of save this for the later, the later discussion about this episode. But I think this is a good time to bring it up. So you talk about how Scully is all of a sudden almost back to like, early season skeptical, knee-jerk skeptic Scully. Now, there's something very interesting at work here. And I think I've seen some rumblings about this. I've seen a bit of chatter about this. But if we go back to My Struggle 3 and then take it up to, this and plus one, and look at the way these episodes are shot, look at the lighting, look at the color scheme, look at the texture, the sort of the grain of the film that we're seeing here. I am starting to really wonder if this entire episode is taking place in an alternate reality. That this is not X-Files Universe 1 continuity here. That this is another.
Do you mean season 11 in total, or just plus one?
Yeah. No, season 11 in total. That I'm really getting the sense that it feels like classic X-Files, but maybe it feels a bit too much like classic X-Files. And the twinning and these doppelgangers showing up and appearing and reappearing. Yeah. Throughout the story, I'm wondering, like, Carter is very fractal. Carter has he has a very strange imagination. He has a very strange, quirky way of looking at the world. It's very skewed. And it almost like he almost works with a kind of dream logic, but it's almost like a dream logic that he only understands because it's his dream, And what I'm starting to wonder if what we are seeing in these episodes is that this is all, not a dream, but that almost like, if I was going to get really comic booky about this, we have that last scene in My Struggle 2, and Scully and Mulder and Miller are stranded on this bridge, and everyone's dying, and the aliens are landing, and this is all sort of sold as a vision that William psychically, imparts to Scully. But I'm starting to I'm almost getting like a Jacob's Ladder vibe here. It's like I'm always starting to wonder if this is like Scully's, almost like what we saw with Field Trip, the Magic Mushroom episode, or one of the Magic Mushroom episodes, that you never quite know what reality is.
Well, I would take that even further, right? Because like if you go back to season 10, you've got baby Mulder and Scully, right? Agent Miller and Einstein. And so it's like you've got doppelgangers appear within the FBI, and they're just younger versions of those two characters. So already you have a twinning doppelganger alternate reality thing going on. And if you kind of take it back to I think it was Fight Club, right? That terrible episode. You've got like Mulder and Scully's doppelgangers in some New Orleans office somewhere.
But they use their photo doubles, by the way.
Yeah. So even in season 10, it's almost as if, like, I would suggest that in the back of Carter's mind, he's already playing with this, whatever this twinning simulation alternate reality theme is that kind of is jazzing him. Now that's where his kind of passion is with regards to any mythology, because definitely, like, the episode we were just talking about opens with Mulder and Scully waking from sleep or from dream. And it kind of ends the same way. And, I think one of the last shots is the creepy, dark, long-haired assassin who's like some evil twin of Langley doing that creepy circular motion as if he's like Svengali or somebody, he's like, he's signaling something. And so Carter's clearly playing around with these things. And I think it harkens back to the world we find ourselves in, a world where we're not entirely sure anymore what is real.
Yeah, and it's funny when you mentioned the politics. I mean, I still remember just sort of monitoring the election results in November 2016, and
Yeah.
just feeling this sense of like, okay, I guess up is down now, and in is
Yeah.
out. It's
Yeah.
like it was just such a oh, am I still in reality, or have I wandered into the you know the rabbit hole here?
Exactly. And when you think about like the next episode on the list, right? That's I think is going to be a Darren Morgan episode, and I think is going to deal more with themes of alternates and reality and things not being quite what we imagine them to be. So yeah, I think that is definitely. I think you're absolutely right, Chris. I think you've definitely picked up on a through line here that is very intentional on Carter's part.
Okay, so I called out the Langley AI thing. As soon as I saw that, I guess that this is how they're going to resolve that storyline. And of course, I didn't begin to expect how they're going to resolve the My Struggle 3 storyline. But I'm really starting to wonder if Carter's got something up his sleeve, and if the very last scene of this series is going to be the exact same scene that we saw at the end of My Struggle 2. It's all going to end up, they're going to have some story and things are going to happen, and it's just going to end up back on that bridge. And it's a sort of Jacob's Ladder phenomenon where, this is all, the end is near. These characters are meeting the ends. This entire universe, really, this X-Files universe is about to be destroyed. And that's how it's just going to end with that same scene, which to me was the absolute best scene in that entire season. I mean, certainly the most memorable. I mean, whatever Carter's shortcomings as a writer are, he has a great storytelling instinct, that isn't always well served by his writing style. But that scene, I mean, we've seen so many alien invasion stories, and particularly, Battle Los Angeles and all these kind of movies that sort of popped up in the mid 2000s there that were sort of taking, and then we had Falling Skies. We just had so many of these narratives. It just became very boring and humdrum.
I think what it shows is that context is everything. Like the reason that scene on the bridge is so powerful is because it's not overblown. It's very almost chic in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like the way it's shot, the way it's done. It's like X-Files was always so good at showing you that, like, listen, like sometimes less is more. Sometimes you don't need the biggest budget in the world. You don't need a whole bunch of incomprehensible CGI flying around on the screen. All you need is like some kind of iconic image or something with a lot of resonance and potency, and then it's about how you contextualize it and frame it that sells or that engages. And X-Files has always been great at doing that. So yeah, I share your feelings in terms of like that scene on the bridge with the ship, just in terms of the way it looked and the way it was shot, was quite intense and powerful. Similarly in Red and the Black, the way all of those things were done, full of power in the way it was handled.
Yeah, the Red and the Black is one of my all-time favorite episodes. Particularly.
Mine too.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I want to bring up, and I'm glad you brought that up because that brings another thought to mind, and that's that that whole scene with Scully under hypnosis, where it's almost, I'm almost reminded, it's like Hildegard of Bingen or Saint Teresa or something. It's the ecstasy of contact of some kind of transcendence.
It's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from.
It's very sexually charged, very highly sexually charged, and the way Carter shoots it, where you're sort of dropping down from the ceiling on this session, I just think is astonishingly powerful and really one of the most memorable sequences I think in the entire history of the series. But the veracity of that experience is called into question right away. Mulder is saying, I've got hundreds of accounts like this, down in the X-Files. I mean, I've heard this all before. Yeah, it's weird that all these people were burned to death and all these other people are missing and so on and so forth. But, basically what we're looking at here is a military exercise, with live fire military exercise, and Scully was somehow brought to this drama through the homing signal in the chip, that was putting in her neck earlier in the season. And again, it's the whole subtext issue, and I think a lot of people sort of overlook that. I mean, a lot of people who say the mythology doesn't make sense are people who don't pay attention to what is not being said or what is being implied. But but again, we had this experience. We're experiencing this with Scully. This whole episode on the bridge, and it's so powerful, and it's so shocking, and it's so numinous, really. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. And I think that really speaks to the X-Files mystique, particularly at that time in our history, is that there's a numinosity to it. There's a presence to it. So,
yes,
but
most definitely.
Yeah, but does it raise the possibility that, we're shifting in and out of, non-reality somehow? I mean, the way Carter thinks and the way he is like so entirely fractal in his storytelling, is that what they're trying to draw attention to, that this is all just more fantasy?
I think in some way, I think you're definitely onto something, because it's like as if politically, right, we think it feels like we're in some sort of parallel world, right, where nothing makes sense, and this feeling of like, are we just stuck in a rut somewhere, spinning our wheels and burning the tread on our tires somehow? Like, are we in some sort of pocket universe, figuratively, or maybe literally, like, or whatever, like? And so this idea of like, what does it mean to sort of be stuck in a holding pattern, or what does it mean to be sort of in a new environment where you haven't figured out all the signifiers yet, so you can't orient yourself. You don't have a compass that you can really trust, And so yeah, I definitely think what you just talked about is definitely of a piece of season 11 and even season 10, I would suggest. And it's, these are themes that X-Files has played around with for such a long time, not necessarily in this sort of explicitly technological simulation theory, alternate reality way, in the kind of the new mythology, but they've definitely touched on these themes before, quite intentionally. So yeah, you're the X-Files genius, Chris. So I defer to your thoughts on that. But I think it's a very strange time that we're living in, and in order to reflect that, I think the X-Files has to be very strange, in a way.
Well, let me just bring one thing else up, and this is something that I saw on message boards and groups and things like that about the X-Files, and it's sort of, it got the old antennae buzzing, and that's the fact that Carter in My Struggle 3, when he's harking back to NME, the 7th season episode, before that bombshell is dropped, fans complained that he was using alternate takes, that he wasn't actually using the scenes from the episode itself, but he was using outtakes. And that sort of like was almost like a signal to me. Is that telling us, is Carter telling us in his very fractal, fourth dimensional way that is all unreality, that all of this is somehow unreality? And getting back to, what you're saying about, the reality that we find ourselves in, I mean, one thing that we really need to always keep in mind about Carter is that Carter is connected. I mean, that guy is connected. He's connected to, a network of very powerful people within the FBI and the CIA, and particularly retired agents, like the Academy Group, who are sort of the original model for the original Millennium Group. But, one thing that I never get tired of recounting, because it just seems like so bizarre, is that Carter was embedded with the FBI anti-terrorism task force at the Athens Olympics. And it's like, stop. What, he was what? It's like, how did that happen? This guy writes science fiction television programs. I mean, how did he end up, tagging along with, the FBI, who are arguably more powerful than the CIA at this point? I mean, how did that happen?
But that's the whole point, right? I mean, I think it's like, within these elite power structures, like as you've kind of discussed on the blog before, Chris, people take extreme possibilities very, very seriously, and they have the money and the resources to do so, right? So it's like, how would that change someone's perspective on life? Like, what does a billionaire with access to all kinds of technological research or a government infrastructure or whatever that the general Joe Sixpack, me and you, just the normal public, don't have access to? How does that change the way you view the world and the way you imagine the world is constructed? And I think these are because we live in a world where it's like we think everything is fine as long as Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are still up and running, right? Like the world can't really end as long as Twitter doesn't go down or as long as the Wi-Fi doesn't go down. That's kind of how people think. But
well, Twitter went down today. It went down today in Europe. It's funny you should mention that.
There you go, right? So like just how fragile are our a priori assumptions about how things work? And it's like if AI and simulation theory and all of these theories are kind of not being ridiculed anymore in the mainstream press, and we have all of these, suddenly everyone's taking aliens seriously. Suddenly everyone's taking things seriously that were, which were like only fringe dwellers were interested in, like maybe a decade ago. All right.
You mentioned the whole thing with the aliens. I mean, it's like all of a sudden, wait, the Washington Post and the New York Times and Scientific American are taking aliens seriously now. At the same time, people in the UFO field are suddenly becoming very skeptical of all this. And then we find out, oh wait, there actually was an X-Files. There actually was, and they were working with people like this billionaire Bob Bigelow. But it's like the world has changed so radically, and it almost seems to me like I wonder if Carter said, oh, it's great, because we've got all these new things to write stories about, but maybe it isn't great because it's just like you were sort of prophesying this world, this weird reality in the earliest seasons of the X-Files, and now it's come true. It's like now we're living in that world.
But that kind of bizarre, where the world seems more filmic and cinematic and more sci-fi, in a really uncomfortable, unsettling way. I think collectively we need to get used to that because I think there's way more of that coming. It's like we are in a sort of a new world where like the things that we thought were the things that we dismissed, I think we're going to have to readdress because the world is changing fast, and that. Those kind of eerie stories that feel like they've just been ripped out of X-Files or Millennium or Fringe or Supernatural, I think we're going to have to adapt because I think there's going to be a lot more of that type of stuff. Regardless of whatever you think about the veracity of them or the truth claims behind them, I just think that kind of ambience and that kind of mood is going to be something that is going to be around, in the years to come.
Well, it's what I call the new normal. We're either parallels or actual fulfillments of storylines we saw in the X-Files. So it's like it almost seems like the X-Files is almost a victim in some sense of its own prophetic success, that it was so successful at prophesying the world that we live in now, the reality that we live in now, that in some regards people don't need to be reminded of that because we're still trying to find shelter from the storm, so to speak. And at the same token, it's like, you've been made redundant. You've been made redundant by the reality that you prophesied.
I think also a part of it is that, I think that all those points are valid and very, very well observed, Chris. But I also think that, X-Files was this neo-modern Gothic kind of series of folktales in a way. And I think when you're in a society that is discovering the way power truly works in their world, which is where we seem to be now, the world is thus kind of revealed as more modern neo-Gothic or kind of neo-noir, if you know what I mean. Like the world is revealed more as that because power moves in secrecy, right? And you have, like we alluded to earlier, we have all these unaccountable think tanks and private companies and private security interests, and it's a very strange, savage playing field, So I would be more surprised if the world didn't, seem more like an episode of the X-Files. That would be more shocking to me.
Before we go though, I because we're really running the clock here, I just wanted to one of the interesting things about this episode, what they call the shippy bits, which is, very chaste and very reserved, but highly suggestive bedroom scenes
Yeah.
with
And very, very charged, I felt.
yes, and that beautiful. I think one of the greatest closing shots
Yeah, I
in the
totally agree.
history of the series. I just was like,
Yeah.
fantastic. It's funny because I'll give shippers a lot of hassle, but I am also a shipper in that regard. It's just like I don't fetishize the ship, but it's the ship is very much part of the appeal for me. But yeah, so that was very interesting because it's drawn in a much different way, and in one regards, it's more explicit than we've ever seen. Their relationship being in the context of the show, which is very chaste, but it also very much it's kind of a sadness to it as well. It's like we're
Yeah,
getting older, and I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
have children anymore, and it's like, what am
But
I doing with my life? Why?
but
Who am I?
that's why I liked it, because it was sort of like, it was, I don't know, like honestly middle aged, and because it was so, because it felt sort of, it had that sad bittersweet quality. It kind of made it sexier in a way, in the sense that, for example, that closing shot, right, where she's like, extreme possibilities, baby, and she opens the door and Mulder's standing there and his expression doesn't change, which I just thought was a brilliant touch. It's not like, it felt like that was kind of hot for them in that moment. It's not like they're trying to cheat the chemistry. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to get at? Like, it's like, it was appropriate for where these people are in their lives now, and I just bought it like as righteous.
Yeah, the chemistry is still there.
Yeah, for sure.
Very good. Well, I think we talked these episodes to death, but it's good. I mean, because
Super fun.
yeah, just to let listeners know, we had recorded an episode last week on this, and Raj was tired, I was tired, and I felt we were like kind of a bit tentative because we still didn't really know where things were going. But now we have like two extremely strong episodes, to get excited about. Yeah. Under the belt now, and it looks like the winning streak is going to extend for at least another couple of episodes. So very encouraging. I would say that these two episodes are more worthwhile than the entirety of season 10. They definitely recaptured the style. Maybe not necessarily the magic, but they definitely they got the vibe down of classic X-Files, and that is, to me, is worth celebrating. Because at this point in time, for me, it's all gravy. This is coda. This is this is a little bit of a dessert, and I'll take what we can get. And
I think about it in pretty much exactly the same way, Chris. Like,
Well, good. So next week we've got Darren Morgan's forehead sweat. The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat. I think that's the episode's title. Very, very strange, but typically Darren Morgan. So we will see you next week. Raj, thank you very much. Great talk. Really enjoyed it, and very educational, I think, as well.
Absolute pleasure, Chris, as always.
Very good. I will talk to you soon, my friend.
All righty.
And everyone else, please tune in next week for the Secret Sun Radio Mystery Hour.